Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Introduction to Teaching Students with Visual Impairments. In this session, we will explore effective teaching methods, adaptations, and best practices to support students with visual impairments in educational settings. By the end of this module, you will understand how to create accessible learning experiences and implement strategies to cater to the diverse needs of these students. And by the end of this module, students will be able to recall the fundamental principles of inclusive education and its significance for the students with visual impairments, explain the key strategies for adapting teaching methods and materials for visually impaired students, demonstrate the use of assistive technology and multisensory teaching approaches in classroom instruction, analyze different case studies to determine effective instructional practices for students with varying degrees of visual impairment, and design an inclusive lesson plan incorporating tactile, auditory, and technological adaptations to support visually impaired learners. Students with visual impairments face unique challenges in classrooms that primarily cater to sighted individuals. Traditional learning relies heavily on visual elements such as text, graphics, and videos. For instance, when a teacher explains a concept using a chart or a diagram on the board, a student with visual impairment may not benefit from the information in the same way their sighted peers do. To ensure equal access to education, teachers must adapt instructions by using alternative formats such as Braille, audiobooks, or tactile graphics. For example, in a history lesson, instead of showing a timeline on a projector, the teacher can provide a tactile timeline with raised lines and braille text so the students with visual impairments can explore it through touch. Now that we have established an understanding of challenges faced by students with visual impairments and the importance of inclusive education, let's move forward to discuss the principles of effective teaching for students with visual impairments. These principles serve as a foundation for ensuring that all students, regardless of their vision abilities, can participate meaningfully in learning. Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, is an instructional framework designed to support diverse learners, including those with disabilities. UDL consists of, first, multiple means of representation, so providing materials in Braille, large print, tactile graphics, and audio formats ensures that the students with different levels of visual impairment can access content. For example, a math worksheet with printed numbers can be supplemented with Braille worksheets or an audio recording explaining the problems. Second is multiple means of engagement. Encouraging hands-on activities, peer collaboration, and real-life application makes learning more meaningful. For example, in a geography lesson, a teacher can use a tactile globe with raised country borders to help students understand the concept of continents and countries. Third, we also have the multiple means of expression, so allowing students to demonstrate their learning through verbal responses, tactile models, and audio recordings help accommodate different abilities. For example, instead of requiring a visually impaired student to complete a written essay, the teacher can allow them to record their response using voice notes. The second principle is adapting instruction to the needs of students with visual impairment. Educators should incorporate multisensory teaching methods, such as tactile learning. So, Braille, raised line maps, and 3D models allow students to interact with materials using touch. Next is auditory learning. So, text to speech software, audiobooks, and verbal instructions can help students who rely on listening. For example, a literature teacher can use audiobooks or text to speech app to allow students to access reading materials. Next is auditory learning. Text to speech software, audiobooks, and verbal instruction help students who rely on learning. For example, a literature teacher can use audiobooks or text to speech app to allow a student to access reading materials. Next, we have kinesthetic learning. So, hands on exploration and real world experiences may make learning more interactive. For instance, During a physics lesson about motion, a student can engage in activities such as feeling different types of inclined planes to understand slopes and angles. Now that we have explored the principles of effective teaching for students with visual impairment, we will delve deeper into differentiated instruction, which tailors teaching methods based on whether a student has low vision or total blindness. Let's discuss specific strategies for each group. For teaching students with low vision, these students have partial sight or can benefit from the following strategies. First, seating near the board to help them see better. Second is using high contrast visuals, such as black text on yellow background, to improve readability. Next is providing large print books, 18 to 22 point font, to make reading easier. And lastly, encouraging the use of assistive devices like magnifiers and screen readers. For example, if a student has difficulty reading small text in textbooks, the teacher can provide large print materials or allow the student to use an electric magnifier to enlarge the text. While students with low vision can still use some visual information, students with total blindness require alternative approaches. Let's now discuss strategies for teaching students who Let's now discuss strategies for teaching students who rely entirely on tactile and auditory learning. For students with total blindness, teachers should provide braille materials to ensure they can read and write, or utilize auditory instruction instead of board work. For example, instead of writing instructions on the whiteboard, the teacher can give verbal explanations. Another is incorporate 3D models and tactile diagrams to help students understand spatial concepts. You can also encourage verbal participation. You can also, again, you can also encourage verbal participation to reinforce learning. Instead of relying on written quizzes, students can answer questions orally or through recorded responses. Now that we have explored specific teaching strategies for students with different levels of visual impairment, let's shift our focus to adapting teaching methods to ensure all learning resources are accessible and effective. So, when adapting teaching materials for visually impaired students, you can create accessible textbooks and worksheets by using large fonts with high contrast, convert texts into braille or audio formats for accessibility, or highlight important terms using bold and underlined text to improve readability for students with low vision. When using tactile graphics and 3D models, replace visual diagrams with raised lines or emboss graphics to make them accessible through touch. Use real-life objects to explain concepts, such as using a model of the solar system instead of using a printed diagram. For instance, if teaching about the human skeleton, a teacher can provide a 3D model that students can feel instead of just describing the bone structure verbally. In addition to physical materials, technology plays a crucial role in accessibility. Let's discuss how to create accessible digital content. With the increasing use of technology in education, it is important to ensure that digital content is accessible. Many students with visual impairments rely on screen readers like JAWS, NVDA, and VoiceOver, and teachers should format digital files properly for these tools to work. Next, you can provide descriptive alternative text for images. So when using visuals in presentations or online content, adding a descriptive alternative text helps screen readers convey important information. Another strategy is to use audio described videos. So in subjects where videos are necessary, including audio descriptions ensure that visually impaired students understand what is happening on screen. Beyond digital adaptations, multisensory teaching methods can enhance learning. So let's explore tactile and auditory learning approaches. For tactile learning and multisensory approaches, multisensory instructions benefits all students, especially those with visual impairments. Some effective strategies are using Braille materials for reading and writing, as introducing Braille early helps students develop strong literacy skills. Next, you may use tactile maps for geography lessons, as raised maps allow students to explore geographical features by touch. Another strategy is hands-on activities to reinforce concepts. For example, using real objects to teach counting and math instead of relying solely on written numbers. Now, let's discuss auditory learning and assistive technology, which provide additional ways to support visually impaired students. Many visual impaired students rely on audio-based learning tools. Some key resources include screen readers, voice assistants. Another is audiobooks and digital libraries, as these platforms such as Learning Alley and Bookshare provide a wide range of educational audiobooks. A critical part of education for blind students is Braille literacy. Let's examine why this is important and how teachers can support it. Braille is an essential skill for blind students, allowing them to read, write, and take notes independently. Best practices include introducing the Braille alphabet at an early age. Just like print literacy, Braille literacy should begin early. We should also encourage Braille note-taking in classrooms, as providing Braille note-taking devices or paper allows students to engage with lessons actively. Another is to provide refreshable Braille displays for digital access. These electronic devices help students read digital text in Braille format. Now, let's look at the adaptations in mathematics, science, and social studies. Subjects like math and science often rely heavily on visual information, so here are some ways to make them accessible. Again, using raised line graphs and tactile rulers for math, as these tools allow students to understand measurements and graphs through touch. Next, you may provide 3D models for science experiments and offer audio-based geography lessons with descriptive narration of maps and locations can replace visual representations. Physical education is another important aspect of schooling. So let's discuss how to adapt physical education and mobility training. Ensuring that students with visual impairments have access to physical activities is crucial. Some adaptations may include adapting sports for blind students, for example, using balls with bells for auditory tracking. Next is to provide orientation and mobility training, teaching students how to navigate spaces safely and confidently. Next is to encourage safe, independent movement, like guiding students in using canes or guide dogs effectively. Finally, let's talk about assessment strategies that accommodate visually impaired students. Assessment should be inclusive and fair. Some strategies may include oral exams instead of written tests, allowing students to demonstrate understanding verbally. Next is to allow extended time for reading assignments to ensure that students have enough time to process and comprehend materials. And lastly, using assistive technology for assessments, so you permit them to use screen readers or braille devices for test taking. We have now covered various strategies for teaching students with visual impairments, including differentiated instruction, assistive technology, and tactile learning methods. As educators, it is our responsibility to ensure every student has equitable access to education. By implementing these strategies, we can create a more inclusive and supportive learning environment for students with visual impairments. Thank you for joining this session. Keep exploring ways to make education accessible for all.